So why a language is distributed the way they are, and how do languages form? This is a map of the language families of the world. So language can be split up into around 15 families. But this is, somewhat controversial. Some linguists say that it should be split further because, certain languages are pretty distinctive from each other within the same family. So we have the kind of Indo-European language, which is this yellow one, which is, I guess, like, the spread of English, but also kind of all of the languages that like came from kind of Germanic or Latin origins. So like, the Romance languages, and then the like Scandinavian, German, Dutch languages. Then we have the Sino-Tibetan, which is this area here, the red area, which is, mostly just kind of China and stretching up into parts of Mongolia and Russia. And then some other languages like the Amerindian in America and the Niger-Congo in southern and western Africa. So the first step in mapping the distribution of world languages is to classify them. And at the global scale, languages, they're classified into these around 15 families. But this process is open to debate. And linguists track the formation of a language through things like cognates, through how consonants change. And they can deduce a connection amongst languages and between languages using these things. So a cognate is a word that has the same linguistic derivation as other words. So an example of this is that the Latin for milk is lacte, in Italian it is latta, in Spanish leche, and in French lait. So all of these things are linked back to the root word, the Latin word. And consonants can change in predictive ways, and they usually soften over time. So the German word for father is Vater. Dutch, it is Vader. In English, it's father. So this, the first consonant, the V, has softened over time into more of a F, and the middle consonant, the T, has softened from a T to a D to a Th. So this is something that is particularly kind of constant over time. As languages change, these consonants kind of become softer. So linguists deduce connections between languages and can track them back in time to kind of find the root language using these two things, through cognates and through how consonants change. So one of the kind of earlier linguists, Grimm, forgot his first name, sorry, but he was one of the brothers Grimm who wrote and adapted all of the kind of folk tales into the stories that have not since been adapted by Disney into the things they are today. That's a good example of how cultures shift and change over time. But he suggested that cognates may prove the relationship between languages in a scientific way. And he developed, together with William Jones, here we go, Jacob Grimm, together with William Jones, they hypothesized, they came up with the first kind of major linguistic hypothesis, which was the existence of an ancestral Indo-European language called Proto-Indo-European. And they used backwards reconstruction through tracking consonants and the hardening, through tracking cognates and the hardening of consonants to try and work backwards towards this original Proto-Indo-European language. And then they can do a thing called deep reconstruction as well, where they try and recreate that language. So language divergence is where two languages form from an old one. Language convergence is the opposite, where two languages collapse into one. And language extinction is, what it says, it's when a language goes extinct, when it dies out. And this can either happen when an entire culture dies out, when all of the descendants of the people who spoke that language perish, or it can happen, which is like more often what happens, where people choose to speak another language. So, and this generally happens over several generations as newer generations kind of see less worth in their language, and they they need to speak English because it's the worldwide language, or other places maybe like China. So these linguists, they theorize that the hearth, the place where this language developed from, this Proto-Indo-European language, was somewhere in the vicinity of the Black Sea or East Central Europe, and they did this through tracking these consonants and cognates. So yeah, language can be formed and can be tracked through divergence, convergence. Languages are formed through divergence, convergence, and extinctions. And the formation of languages can be studied by linguists through backwards reconstruction using cognates and the hardening of consonants. And the hearth of a language can be identified in a similar way. So this is a tree that was developed of all of the kind of the languages that came out of the Proto-Indo-European language. And it works in a similar way to an evolutionary tree, I guess, where, further distant languages, so like Greek and Germanic languages, or Greek and Romance languages, are, quite separated. They split off from each other right at the start. And these languages split into from the start of this Proto-European language into Greek and into Armeno, which went into Indo-Iranian, which ended up with Sanskrit and Old Iranian, which has since been split up into all of these new languages: Bengali, Punjabi, these kind of Indic languages you find in and throughout India. Whereas the language that split off this way, it split off into the Celtic and the Romance languages, so Latin-based languages and Britannic-based, so the kind of people from like Scotland, Gaelic languages in Ireland, in Scotland, the Welsh language, Cornish language, and then it split quite far back and also developed through into the Latin languages, where we have French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian. So there are a number of different kind of ideas as to how the Proto-Indo-European language spread out from its hearth throughout Europe and throughout India. So one idea was the conquest theory, where this language spread east to west on horseback, or through the diffusion of agriculture, perhaps, where these people who came from this area overpowered earlier inhabitants, and they began the diffusion and differentiation of these languages into the ones that they are today. The other hypothesis is the dispersal hypothesis, where the Indo-European languages arose. They were first carried eastward into Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, and then next around the Caspian Sea and across the Russian-Ukrainian plains and on into the Balkans, and then I guess out through Europe. So these kind of two theories would just, I guess, where it spread from and how it spread out. And they tracked these spreads through the kind of formation of cognates and through consonant hardening and that kind of thing in the languages that we have today. So these are the two kind of proposed hypotheses of how they spread. So we either have the one where they spread eastward first, out into Iran and India and up through Russia and then out into Europe, or where they spread westward and out through into Europe first, and then I guess back down into India and the Middle East after that. So yeah, and this ended up with the formation of all of these different languages within Europe. And there's a lot. So we have the Germanic group, the Romance group, the Slavic languages, the kind of Celtic, Baltic, Hellenic, Thracian, all of these different languages developed out of this original kind of Proto-Indo-European language. And then these languages have subfamilies within them as well. So we have the Romance languages, which include French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, and Portuguese. And they have much in common because they all stem from Latin, but they're not mutually comprehensible. Like some words are pretty similar, and you have similar kind of cognates, but someone who speaks Portuguese would not be able to fluently converse with someone who speaks French and, you know, have them completely understand each other. Then you have the Germanic languages, which are, again, come from they come from the Germanic group as opposed to from Latin. So we have German, Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, and also English. But English has borrowed languages from a lot of different, borrowed its language from a lot of different places, from the Romance languages as well. But I guess as a whole, it's mostly developed from the Germanic languages. And then we have the Slavic languages, so Russian, Polish, Czech, Slovak, Ukrainian, all of these kind of Eastern European and Russian places. And these developed as Slavic people migrated from a base in present-day Ukraine around about 2,000 years ago. And languages are related to how we politically divide the world. So a comparison of Europe's linguistic and political maps show a high correlation between the languages spoken and the political organization of space, so where we draw our boundaries. But with a few important exceptions. So there's French speakers in Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy, German speakers in Hungary, Hungarian speakers in Slovakia, etc. And there's one language in Europe which is in no way related to any of the other languages in Europe, and it's somewhat of a mystery. And the language is called the Basque language in Euskera in northern Spain. And this is not its own independent country, despite the fact that the people who live there, you know, have their own independent culture and their own language, which is completely different to any other European languages. And so, you know, a lot of these other places in Europe are divided by the language that is spoken, but this country is not. It's being like amalgamated into Spain. And this has given rise to, you know, a great deal of I guess, division within this area, where there are like Basque separatists who want to have their own country, and they have, this is an example of graffiti that's on a wall of a building in this area in San Sebastian, where, you know, people want freedom for the Basque country because they perceive themselves to be a country. They are their own language. They are their own culture. Why should they not also be their own country? So now we move on to Africa. So Africa has a huge diversity of the languages that they speak there, but it's broken up into about 6 language families. So you have the kind of Indo-European family, which is, you know, just kind of Afrikaans and English for the people who speak it in, you know, mostly South Africa. However, there's also a huge amount of, you know, other languages in here as well. So like this map doesn't show any overlap. The southwest of South Africa is not only represented by people who speak Afrikaans or English. There are a whole lot of other cultures within there, including the Xhosa people, who I cannot pronounce the name properly because it has a click that I cannot do because I do not have the tongue for it. I don't know, but yeah, but so this language, this map is just not exactly accurate. There's a lot of overlap. It doesn't show that. But yeah, but other than the Indo-European language, there are the Afro-Asiatic family, the Niger-Congo family, the Saharan family, the Sudanic family, and the Khoisan family. And the Niger-Congo family is the one that is the most dominant. And there are languages in Africa that are some of the oldest in the world. The Khoisan languages includes a click, so does Xhosa. Yeah. So Nigeria's 141 million people speak more than 500 different languages. So that's just in one area. And this area is up around here. It's the Niger-Congo language family. But within that family, within just this small country, relatively small country, there are 500 different languages. The three most prominently spoken languages are regionally distributed. You have Hausa in the north, which includes 35 million people, Yoruba in the southwest, which is 25 million people, so down around here, and Igbo in the southeast, or Igbo, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry, which also has over 25 million people. And these languages are tied up with culture and with like tribalism and with historic warfare. So when Nigeria gained independence in 1962, it adopted English as the official language because the three major regional languages are too politically charged. And so they're unsuitable for a national language. If one was picked over another, it would probably end up with like civil war.